In the heart of the Alsace region, where the air smelled of fresh pine and the Rhine River wound its way through the land, a dark cloud loomed. It was the winter of 1374, and the region was about to be ravaged by a storm of a different kind. Imagine a horde of ruthless mercenaries, a band of marauders who pillaged, burned, and killed without mercy. They were led by one of the most powerful and feared knights of the time, Enguerrand, and the seventh Lord of Coucy. This is the story of how a nobleman's ambition turned a peaceful winter into a nightmare for the people of Alsace and the Aargau. Enguerrand and Coucy was a formidable figure, a man of noble blood and vast wealth. He was related to the Habsburgs, one of the most powerful families in Europe, through his mother. But despite this connection, he had a bone to pick with his cousin, Duke Leopold of Austria. Coucy believed that Leopold had wronged him by refusing to pay his mother's dowry, which included the territories of Brisgau, Sundgau, and Ferret. These lands were rich and fertile, and Coucy was determined to reclaim them. For 6 weeks from October to November, Coucy's assembled forces rampaged through Alsace. Villages were looted, homes were burned, and people were killed. The Franciscan monastery of Thann was reduced to ashes, and the convent of Schonensteinbach was so devastated that it lay abandoned for 20 years. The people of Alsace were terrorized, and their cries of horror echoed through the region. But here's the strange part. Coucy himself was nowhere to be seen. He had not taken command of his forces, and his absence was a mystery. Some speculated that he was deliberately delaying his arrival to weaken his own troops through the hardships of winter. This theory seemed plausible because another famous knight, Bertrand du Guesclin, had also delayed his campaign in 1365 until December. But Coucy's intentions were unclear, and the truth remained shrouded in secrecy. Before the chaos began, Coucy had taken steps to justify his actions. He wrote to the Duke of Brabant, the imperial vicar in Alsace, to inform him of his intention to reclaim his territories. The Duke assured him that no imperial action would be taken to oppose his efforts. Coucy also wrote to the towns of Strasbourg and Colmar, assuring them that he meant no harm and urging them to support his cause. However, his letters fell on deaf ears, as the towns were already reeling from the violence unleashed by his mercenaries. The situation in Alsace was dire. 40 villages in the Sundgau were destroyed, and 100 people in Wattwiller were killed without mercy. Men and women were taken as captives to serve the brigands' needs. The Franciscan monastery of Thann was burned to the ground, and the convent of Schonensteinbach was so ruined that it was abandoned for 2 decades. The companies, as the mercenaries were known, exacted their usual tribute, taking money, horses, and fine fabrics from the rich, and shoes, horseshoes, and nails from the poor. Despite the chaos, some captains in Coucy's pay tried to maintain discipline. They hanged culprits almost daily in an effort to stop the violence, but their attempts were futile. The mercenaries, accustomed to lawless behavior, were beyond control. Duke Leopold, facing the invasion, adopted a strategy similar to that of Charles V. He ordered the Alsatians to destroy everything that could aid, shelter, or feed the enemy, and to retreat within walled towns and castles. This meant burning crops and buildings, a painful task for the peasants who relied on these resources for survival. Leopold also ordered the fortification of towns and castles capable of defense, and the razing of others. It's unclear how much of this was actually carried out, but the impact on the local population was devastating. With insufficient forces to confront Coucy's numbers, Leopold withdrew to the fortress of Breisach across the Rhine. He relied on the self-reliant Swiss to repel the invaders. The Swiss had a storied history of defeating the Habsburgs, as seen in the battles of Morgarten and Loppen. At Morgarten in 1315, the Swiss used the mountainous terrain to their advantage, hurling boulders and tree trunks on the Habsburg knights, and then charging them like sheep in the hurdles. At Loppen in 1339, the Swiss formed a hedgehog phalanx that withstood the Habsburg cavalry, inflicting heavy casualties. However, the Swiss response to Leopold's call was tepid. The 3 forest cantons, including Schwyz, refused to join the fight, saying they had no interest in defending Leopold's territory against Coucy, who had never wronged them. They would remain spectators, unless the invaders threatened their own lands. Only Zurich, Bern, Lucerne, and Solothurn agreed to defend the Aargau because it bordered their territories. On or about St. Martin's Day, November 11, Coucy finally arrived in Alsace with 1,500 men. By this time, the region had been thoroughly ravaged, and provisions and forage were scarce. According to the chronicler Froissart, the mercenaries accused Coucy of deceiving them, claiming that the land was poor and not the fattest in the world as he had promised. They demanded to return to France, and Coucy, fearing betrayal, left secretly with only 2 companions. However, this account is likely exaggerated, as Coucy and his forces did advance into the Aargau. The companies, now led by Coucy, marched to Basel, where they paraded around the city to demonstrate their strength. The Bishop of Basel, out of hatred for Bern, gave them free passage. They crossed the Jura Mountains, forcing their way through the passes and descending into the Aargau. Meeting little resistance, they seized castles and the ancient wooden bridge at Olten. Leopold, desperate for help, summoned the Bernese, but they refused to fight when they saw the local nobles fleeing. The Aargau was left defenseless, and the people abandoned their homes for safety in the towns. Leopold, in retaliation, ordered his agents to burn fields and fell trees, leaving the region in a state of misery. Coucy established his headquarters at the Abbey of St. Urbain, where he stayed for 18 days. He tried to take control of the more important cities, but his efforts were hampered by the strength of their walls and the scattering of his forces. Even the small town of Bern resisted his siege, and the Lord of Nidau was killed by an enemy arrow. In December, the companies, driven by hunger and the need for plunder, spread out into the Aargau, reaching the frontiers of Zurich and Lucerne. Their thinning numbers made them vulnerable, and their crimes aroused Swiss defiance. In Schwyz, near the lake of Sempach, a group of several hundred Swiss peasants assembled to take action. They were joined by young men from Lucerne, who defied city orders to fight. On December 19, they surrounded the town of Buttechals, where a company of 3,000 Googlers was billeted. The Swiss attacked, killing 300 and burning others alive in a church. The survivors were put to flight, and the Swiss returned to their mountains in triumph. Bern, inspired by the victory, quickly assembled a force. On Christmas night, they surprised a company of Bretons at Gens, killing 300 more Googlers. The next night, they attacked the Abbey of Fraubrunnen, where Owen of Wales was quartered with a large company. The Bernese marched through the night in intense cold, surrounded the abbey before dawn, and set fire to the buildings. In a fierce battle, the Bernese leader, Hans Rieder, was killed, but his men forced the Googlers to flee, leaving 800 dead. Owen of Wales escaped, but the Bernese captured his banner, a red and white flag that is still displayed in the city. The victory at Fraubrunnen was celebrated with songs and chronicles. The Bernese decreed an annual distribution of alms and thanksgiving, and the event became a symbol of Swiss defiance against foreign invaders. For Coucy, the campaign was a disaster. His forces were scattered, and his reputation was tarnished. He returned to France, and the king and his brothers were surprised to see him, having thought he was still in Austria. Coucy explained his actions, emphasizing that the mercenaries were to blame, and he managed to avoid punishment. The winter of 1374 in Alsace and the Aargau was a time of terror and violence, but it also saw the rise of Swiss resistance. The people of the region, though initially helpless, found the strength to fight back and defend their homes. Coucy's ambition had led to a brutal campaign, but it ultimately failed, and his name became synonymous with the horrors of war. This story is a reminder of the terrible consequences of greed, and the resilience of those who stand up against oppression. The winter of 1374 may have been long and dark, but it also saw the light of courage and determination shine through.